Hey, Jack, thanks for coming on. This is on the Based podcast. I always say before I introduce a guest, and they are always based, that the whole purpose of it is speaking to a based, and you are, my friend, one of the most based people I know. I by way of introduction, I just think of your human events intro that comes on every time you do a show, which is international social media superstar, influencer and former Navy intelligence veteran. That sort of covers it, but it's become so much more, hasn't it? It's sort of become generationally intertwined in the MAGA movement and in US politics. And you've had a massive couple of days. I just listening to your podcast, Human Events, this morning, and I listen to it, by the way, every morning when I go for a run, and it gets me up to speed with the US situation. But you've had a massive 48 hours. You want to tell us about what's been happening?
Well, Senator, I couldn't be more thankful to be here. Couldn't be more honored to be here to talk to the good people of Australia and yourself. And thank you again so much. We work really hard on the show, and it's great to hear that we're able to be listened to. And I've learned over the course of doing the podcast that we've really grown our international footprint, which is amazing because certainly there are times where I get into geopolitics. I did today, for example, because we talked about Ukraine, and we've got Zelensky. As you and I are recording this, he's visiting Washington, D.C. He's making a push for another $61 billion US. There'll be times where I've even gone down to South America, and people are telling me that they're listening to me all across South America, and I say, I don't even talk about South America. I don't even mention this ever, and they say, well, no, but we want to know what's going on in the U.S. and we like your perspective. And I say, okay, apparently I'm big in South America now, and we were in Japan recently. We're all over Europe. And by the way, the fact you mentioned that that specific line that you just said in the intro, that's actually our mutual friend Daisy Cousins. That's her voice saying that.
Is that right? Yeah. That's
right.
It sounded like an English woman, but it's Daisy. There you go.
It's Daisy. Well, she's got a little bit, I would say, of her. I would say her accent kind of straddles the two.
Yeah, it does. It does. So on the weekend you had a huge dinner, Republican dinner in New York,
yes.
In, I believe, the very ballroom that Hillary Clinton made the bag of deplorables comment, and this time it was packed with solid Republicans.
Well, this was really a symbolic, I would say, dinner, and in so many ways, right? And you mentioned the fact that this was, yes, the very ballroom, Cipriani's Wall Street, right on Wall Street, not near Wall Street, not just in Lower Manhattan, actually on Wall Street. So that's the level of, I should just tell you the level of rent that the club had to pay that night to utilize that space. That we're there, and so it's symbolic in the sense of our world usurping her world, the dying world, the world that has passed away, that is old and decrepit and decaying, and our world, which is vibrant, which is young, which is new, which is nascent in so many ways, and is just beginning, really just beginning. But the fact that we've symbolically taken one of her sacred spaces, it's sort of the just like in any conquering regime, our new regime is taking the temples and the idols of the previous regime and converting them into our own. And so the fact that we were able to be there and have President Trump on the very stage where Hillary Clinton who Secretary of State, had declared half the country to be deplorable. Right. And we currently have a president in our country that declares half of the country to be extreme, extreme MAGA, he says it, which Trump also mentioned there. There's a lot of symbolism going on. But I think, honestly, the biggest symbolism of the night was the fact that here we are essentially on the eve of the 2024 election. And as you and I sit recording this, we are just about 4 weeks away from the first votes being cast in 2024. So the way it works is that we have, of course, the Christmas holiday, but then we go directly in mid-January. January 15th will be the first votes of the Iowa caucus. So 2024 will begin very, very rapidly here in the U.S. People think, oh, it's not until next November. No, it's not 10 months away. It's 10 days away that we're actually focused on this. And I will be flying out to Iowa. I will be there on the front lines reporting and being active and letting everybody know what's actually taking place there on the ground. If there's any chicanery afoot, we will call that out. But so, the symbolism that I mentioned that evening that struck me is when when Alexander was on the precipice of, he had consolidated power throughout Macedonia, throughout Greece, which at the time included Anatolia. He was about to lead his army into the next land over, of course, which was Persia, the Persian Empire. And the night before he did that, he held a massive banquet with his generals, with his lieutenants, and he brought together, Alexander gathered the Macedonians, and he said, tonight we dine, and tomorrow we march. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly how this felt. It felt that night. It felt like an incredibly powerful event. I was honored to be there along with my wife, and to be, get a shout out from the president, but really to just be in the room, not because of, who we are, but because of the fact that coming up in 2024, we will be faced with one of the most animating tests of human freedom on the planet, of liberty, of patriotism. And if any of these ideals are going to survive, it's going to be in 2024. It's going to start in Iowa in just a couple of weeks' time. And we are all going to be faced with serious tests ahead. No one more so than President Trump, who, of course, his life is on the line in 4 separate trials right now that are going on within 2 of which are in Washington, D.C., one of which is in New York City, another one of which is in Fulton County, Georgia. He's on civil trials. They're trying to take his freedom away. They're trying to strip him of his businesses. They're trying to take his finances away, his wealth away. And make no mistake, he could walk away from all of this. Mm-hmm. He could, and if he dropped out of the race right now, I guarantee all of these cases, all of these things would go away, and he could go home. And I think we all know that Donald Trump had an incredibly charmed life, the life that most people dream of. Married to a supermodel, he's got properties all over the world, fabulous mansion in Florida, and penthouse, and the entire tower in New York City. He had it made, and he sacrificed all of that because he saw the direction of our country. He saw the direction of the West, and he said, I must stand up to do something about the crooked globalists and this regime that has taken power. And he called it out as they were doing. He called out the industrialization. He called out the globalization. He called out the outsourcing of all of our manufacturing base to China. He called out getting in bed with the Chinese Communist Party all the way back in the 1980s. Yeah. He called out the false free trade agreements within North America, this North American free trade agreement that we had NAFTA throughout the 1990s. And he's on record. He's on record going back to the 80s, going back to the 90s on these issues of trade, on the issue of, certainly on the issue of immigration, on the issue of foreign policy and war. He's always stood against these things and stood up for what is in the best interest, not of the special interest, not of businesses, but in the interest of the American people. And by the way, in the interest of the nation. And he's one of the last, I think in some ways he comes from sort of an older tradition, I would say, of a statesman who actually views the country as not a commodities market, or not a place where goods can be sold, just another economic market for the multinational corporations, but actually understands that a nation is a unique place of a unique people with unique traditions, unique backgrounds, unique culture, unique heritage. And that is what must be preserved, not only, by the way, for all of these social concerns and social cohesion, but also because this is the best vessel that we have yet to find for humanity and for the progress of human civilization.
Yeah, you're actually right. I mean, you see those clips occasionally of him on 80s talk shows with Letterman and others, and he's talking the same language, except the only difference is he's worried about the country in relation to Japan in those days rather than China. But it's the same basic principle.
Yeah, he talks about Japan a little more, talks about the Saudis a little bit more, but it's the same idea. It's the same exact idea. Because, of course, Japan would still be in that role had they not gone through their lost decade in the 1990s. That's where the FDI completely shifted over to China. And so China, because of that decade of the 1990s, really took the driver's seat in Asia. And now, of course, we see the Chinese Communist Party just spreading their tentacles out across the entire globe.
And, of course, I want to talk to you a little bit about China again, because no one knows more about China, I'd say, than you, having worked in that area in Navy intelligence. But you've also had, after that, talk about doubling down. It's a huge huge night. But then you sort of wake up the next morning and Alex Jones has been allowed back onto X, Twitter, formerly Twitter. Yes. And all of a sudden you find yourself in front of 11 million people as one of the keynote speakers of a Twitter space, an X space event, with everybody who's anybody, Vivek Ramaswamy, you name it. Elon Musk comes on at the end to top it all off. I don't know where to start with that. Just my mind's a bit blown. I listened to a bit of it this morning, but it was full on. What happened?
Well, it really was an incredible moment, and it's just one of those things that can only take place on X, and this is why X is the preeminent platform, really, of the future at this point. Not only for freedom of speech, for freedom of exchange, and this is what it was. This was a digital town hall of the digital public square, and so if X, or formerly Twitter, is the digital public square, which I believe it is, that's why I've been on the platform for over a decade. People say, how did you build your thing up? I said, I've used it every single day for over a decade, and I've put in the time, I've put in the work to understand what it is. And I've also tried to have a voice and tried to cover things and promote issues that I think matter. And I've been fortunate enough to gain a following by doing so. We get this ability through the new feature there called Spaces to launch these sort of public conversation pieces. So it's audio only. And it was originally supposed to be upon the occasion of the restoration of Alex Jones and his account to X, where I had actually been with Alex on the day that he was suspended on the previous Twitter 5 years ago, September 2018, when Jack Dorsey, the former CEO of Twitter, was appearing to Congress. He held a hearing in Congress, and he testified regarding censorship and regarding blocking and banning of people on the Twitter platform. And so Alex Jones had yet to be censored at that point, but he had been censored on everything else. So he went to sort of confront Jack Dorsey to see what was really going on in Silicon Valley. I went to report on the situation to find out what was going on for myself. I'm with Alex. And then later that day, Alex was banned across all of social media. By the way, and people have talked about past controversies and things he may or may not have said. And in fact, he was banned for criticizing, and I'll say it, he was insulting a journalist, a CNN journalist who probably deserved it. And he was getting very personal in person. And Twitter arbitrarily banned him for this. And Elon Musk actually revealed, I don't know that this had actually ever been said publicly before, because Elon went back into the logs, and he had done this great poll all day Saturday. So while I'm at the gala with President Trump, I'm actually refreshing Elon Musk's Twitter feed, because I'm seeing this poll is counting down, a 12-hour poll, which itself got about 2 million people to vote in. And eventually, should Alex Jones be reinstated, Alex Jones won out 70-30 in the referendum. And Elon admits later on in this call, which included, as you say, so many luminary people, that the reason within the Twitter logs that he had been banned was that it said assaulted a journalist. Well, you can go back and watch the video. Anyone can do this. There's no assault. Does he come up to him? Yes. Does he confront him? Yes. Does he insult him? Yes. Does he use, in some cases, there's no profanity, but he's insulting him. It's, trash talk, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. But there's no assault. And this is a perfect example of, and I said, well, there it is. There's the it shows you the power of the left, whereby from their perspective, speech, words can constitute an assault on someone, whereas if they commit actual physical violence against a conservative or against a business owner or against an institution, well, we're told that's just the language of the oppressed, and we're told that that's just a peaceful protest. And so it was really perfect to even see that. I didn't actually mention it. I don't think anyone mentioned it on the space, but I said, wow, they are very committed to the bit, and that I think is something that a lot of conservatives really need to internalize, that the left is not cynical. The left actually believes the things that they say. They're not in on it. People say, oh, it's just about, money and greed and power. And certainly for some elements, yes. But for by and large, they are ideologically committed to exactly what they are doing. And so if you could find any real through line just looking at the list here now, Alex Jones, Elon Musk, Congressman Matt Gaetz, Vivek Ramaswamy, myself, Patrick Bet-David, so many people, so many names. I'm probably forgetting some of them, but
amazing.
if you could find any through line through all of that, is that the left is against all of us, and we are just trying to live our lives, run our businesses, and do our jobs. But we keep running up against the power of the institutional left, who's trying to stop all of it.
Yeah, I mean, it was the same thing everywhere. I mean, I think here in Australia too, we have, we call them the quiet Australians, the forgotten people sometimes, people just going about their lives, you know, who have things to do, kids to take to sport, businesses to run, and I think we've all assumed that the institutions that have served us well over the course are going to be fine, and of course that's not the case in 2023, and people have to be involved, and that's what I see in the MAGA movement. I mean, I think because Australia becomes dominated by the mainstream media, and there aren't as many social media platforms like yours that, you know, have taken off. There are a few, but there aren't as many, and they're not as widespread. The MAGA movement really is, I mean, I think it actually, in Australian terms, it is the forgotten people that the founder of our party talked about. The lifters, not the leaners, he used to say. That's sort of the essence. I mean, can you describe MAGA for people? Because there'd be people in Australia that think that's the same as the KKK. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Well, you know, it's interesting because President Trump actually brought that up at the event itself, and he said, look, our movement MAGA stands for Make America Great Again. And so he said, when Joe Biden calls me extreme MAGA, he said, yes, that's actually true. I am extreme in my desire to make America great again, to restore the greatness of our country. And there's no element, because they will try to smear that element. They will try to, and actually this is something we got into on the Twitter space, the power of these PR agencies to take anything you say out of context, to force it viral, to inorganically and artificially take those comments and take that phrasing and then put it out across mainstream media, across legacy media, regime media. They really do have a strong power to be able to smear someone who may be a truth teller that is actually attempting to do the right thing and put out information that will help the advancement of, as I say, human civilization. But instead, what they're really doing is making it so that you don't listen to that person, because they have been declared a non-entity. They've been declared a non-person in George Orwell's parlance. And so the ability of the legacy media to contextualize things is so important. And that's why when you hear MAGA, when I hear MAGA, I think of when I go to the American Midwest or the American South, and particularly the Rust Belt, though, for me, that we call the Rust Belt, you know, Detroit, right? And people remember Detroit when it was the head of the car industry. This was the head for the entire world, right? This is where the best cars in the world, General Motors, Ford, Chrysler, right? This is where everything was headquartered, American industry. There was so much power and greatness associated with that city. And then little by little, those industries and those supply chains all started to migrate to China, or migrate to Mexico, or migrate to Canada under the NAFTA Act. And suddenly the city of Detroit found itself in disrepair. The great cities all throughout the Great Lakes region of the United States, which is essentially what unifies the Rust Belt, and those great working areas, because it used to be that those cities were built up because they were able to utilize the transportation corridor of the Great Lakes and then the St. Lawrence River out to the Atlantic Ocean, then the Mississippi River down to the Gulf of Mexico, to get that industry and get those factories, get those cars out to market. And so this was such a cheap way to be able to do it. This is why it became the industrial center of the United States. But because, and so many people lived there, so many cities built up around this area, but then because the economics started to be changed, and by decision, right? And that this is very clear that this was done by policy, by act of government. It was not done out of economic necessity. It was not done out of nobody voted on this. It wasn't the will of the people or anything like that. And then they fought tooth and nail to get these factories to stay open, to get these things to stay open. And because of globalization, this leads to, as I said before, deindustrialization. So when I hear "Make America Great Again," I think about those factory workers. I think about the people that, and not just that, but also the people who are the service workers who keep our country running, and the fact that those people were left out. Their cities were gutted. Their culture was demeaned in many cases by by legacy media, demeaned by Hollywood, demeaned on the New York news networks, and they're told that because of the way they live or the way they look, and they're not quite as sophisticated as the people in lower Manhattan or the people in California, that they should be looked down upon. And that's why I do view it as an incredible honor, the fact that here we are, the MAGA movement, the movement that is representative of those people, was able to hold our event in that very room, where Hillary Clinton on Wall Street called us all a bunch of deplorables. Guess what? We've taken your room now. We've taken your space. The people, the rubes that have been gutted, that have been looked over, the unsophisticated, the non-cosmopolitans, guess what? We've now taken over your area because our movement is ascendant. And this stripping of freedoms and stripping of economic freedoms that I'm talking about, it's not just something that takes place in the United States. And I talk about these issues all over the world because, and what unifies us is that we're all facing the exact same issues, and in many cases it's from the exact same people.
Yeah, there's a lot of similarity in politics, and we're seeing that in Europe with this sort of shift to the right in through places like the Netherlands and Italy. Yes. And we'll see what comes out in the wash, but certainly the mood's there for political change. I'm interested in the US election. I think everybody's interested in that at the moment. President Trump is 60 points ahead in the primaries. On no measure could anyone possibly be within cooee of it, yet we keep hearing about Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis. What are they? Are they playing for second place in the hope that something will happen to the president? Like what is the wash up of that?
Well, so there are two things there, and you're right. Politically speaking, President Trump has a commanding lead in all of the early states of which I mentioned. Iowa, he's now putting up over. So I said before the importance of Iowa being over. Really the first one that sets the tone. Doesn't have the most, delegates. It doesn't have the highest population of any of the states, but it is the first one that goes. This is an American tradition, right there in the center. Not quite in the Rust Belt that I just described, but very close to it. Very, very close to it. And so it's not far from Chicago. It's close to Chicago. That you have these voters there. They're now backing Trump. He's at over 50%. And as of this morning, the Des Moines Register, which is the gold standard in Iowa, they're not associated with any campaign. They're as independent as you can get in Iowa politics. They came out and with their poll have Trump at over 50% in the primary. You see this again in New Hampshire, which is the next state, then down in South Carolina and on, and Nevada, on and on and on in many of these states. And so the reason really, though, that you're seeing so much institutional money, so much multinational corporation money, Wall Street money, big business money, defense industrial complex money into the candidacies of Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley is because they represent, yes, this return to the mean, but also because there are some people who are still willing to bet on the fact that if one of these cases come through, that if President Trump is indicted, he is indicted, if he's convicted, if he is found guilty, if something happens next, that perhaps it will ruin his chances and it will force him from the race, and then they will be able to pick up the wreckage. And I would just say, I think their psychology, number one, is completely wrong on that. In the United States, when a rapper goes to jail, they usually go, double platinum on the next album. I mean, this is go number one on iTunes. When 50 Cent goes to jail, he's, everybody goes and buys his records. This is always, that's in terms of the psychology. But then in terms of the politics of it, we've already seen that President Trump solidified the field in the primary through the indictment process, through the process of the federal government showing how against his candidacy they are. And because the American people now view his candidacy and they see the direct unfairness of all of these indictments, of them going in and saying that, for just as a basic example, because it's going on right now, he's in this trial in New York and they claim that he committed fraud in the valuation of his assets and the valuation of his businesses. And so they're in the application for financial loans, so bank loans. Well, then the bankers came in and they said, there's no fraud here whatsoever. We We received all of our money back. We received our money back on time. Sometimes the loans were paid back early, as a matter of fact, even before the deadline were reached. We were all making money. And in fact, the bankers came in and said, we look forward to doing more business with Trump and his organizations. And this is the business side. This is the hotels and the golf courses and the resorts and these things. It's nothing to do with the politics. But they said, we think he's a fantastic investment, more than happy to do business with him. And you would think that would end the case right there, because if you found there's no proof of a crime, you can't even find a victim, and yet they're still pushing these things forward. And President Trump said on Saturday night when we were there at Cipriani's in New York that he said the reason that people don't view these indictments as legit is because they're not seen as serious legal indictments. They're seen as Biden indictments, or I would say, I guess, political indictments. People can see it as political. They can see it as an unfair process. And if there's something that Americans, and I would really just say Westerners in general, even if we disagree on the solutions to a problem, if we disagree how to deal with homelessness, if we disagree with how to deal with the economy, et cetera, if there's something that unites us, really, it's the idea of fair play. It's the idea of fair play. You know, if you're watching some sporting event, whatever it is, and the referees come in and they're just clearly biased to one side and they're making bad calls, everybody gets upset about that because we want to see a fair competition. And so it's because of that perception of unfairness that you're now seeing so many moderates, so many independents now turning towards Trump just through this process alone. And then we're also seeing a massive push of independents, moderates, centrists, and even, by the way, just various ethnic groups, Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, even young Americans now are turning more and more towards Trump from the age demographic because of the absolute failure of the current administration and the dire straits the United States economy is in, skyrocketing inflation, the likes of which have not been perceived in a generation in this country, a foreign policy that's in complete shambles. The point, which, by the way, foreign policy is not usually something that comes up really in a presidential election. It's talked about, but what I mean in terms of electoral consequence, usually foreign policy is pretty low on the list. Usually economics is number one, education, healthcare. These are the things that typically drive people to the voters traditionally in American presidential contests. But really, because of the abject failure of Joe Biden on foreign policy, not just in one, but on two fronts, with vis-a-vis Ukraine and now also Israel, and his just complete failure on both fronts there, the prospect of World War III on the brink, this is absolutely something that we've seen in the polling, and this is independent mainstream polling, that is driving people to say, you know what, and it's a very simple pitch, right? It's a very simple pitch. Things were better when Trump was in office. And it's as simple as that. Things were better when Trump was in office. That's an incredibly powerful pitch for the president. It's an incredibly powerful pitch for moderates, for those centrists that he will need to pick up, and he is picking up. And it's incredibly powerful pitch that I do believe will carry him into the White House in about 10 months' time.
And what about from the Democrat side? I mean, clearly the current president is struggling, I think it'd be fair to say. And it seems from the outside that we're starting to get these stories.
Well, he's struggling to walk down a flight of stairs, Alex.
Well, yeah, that's right. Certainly on an airplane. But it seems.
Have you noticed they give him the little stairs now? By the way, have you seen this? That there are two sets of stairs for Air Force One, for this great Boeing that exists there. And I used to, when I was in the military, I actually served in a unit that shared airspace, or shared, I would say, space on the same base where Air Force One is kept. I was an intel officer, and it just kind of worked out that way because I was in the DC area, and you would see the entire fleet of planes. And so they have the large set of stairs, and this is the very ceremonial, when the president comes to, for a state visit, you see he usually steps out on the stairs, and there's that sort of platform, and he kind of waves, and then he walks down the stairs, right? Well, because Joe Biden was having so much trouble with those, they don't wheel those out anymore. They give him the little stairs, like the baby stairs, and he goes down those that are kind of almost on the fuselage.
It's coming out of a cargo hold.
It really is. Yeah. It really, those are the stairs that are typically reserved for your low-level staffers that travel with the president, your support staff that might be with you, people, obviously maintenance. They're used. It's basically like the service stairs.
Oh man. So, how does this play out? He can't go to another election. It feels like the Democrats are, well, somebody is making these stories come to light. There's been this story about the dog and the Hunter stuff, and it all seems to be coming out. Is there some move on to replace him? We keep hearing Gavin Newsom's name, and we keep hearing Hillary Clinton's name as well, by the way. Like, surely they won't go to an election with the current president.
So my contention is that the Democrats are currently locked in what I call on human events, and so you must have heard me say this, that I say that they're in a shadow primary right now. Yeah. It's a three-way shadow primary where, of course, so RFK, as a Democrat, he initially announced that he'd be running against Biden in an actual primary. He then bowed out of that and is now running as an independent. We haven't heard too much from him lately, but I'm certainly keeping an eye on it. But there are two other Democrats I would contend are currently running against Biden, one of which is Gavin Newsom, the governor of California. Clearly, this is a man who's raising his hand and saying, I want the job. Come on, coach, put me in. This is time. His meeting with Xi Jinping, traveling over to Shenzhen and what he called the Bay Area, the Hong Kong area, Pearl River Delta of China, which was then reciprocated by Xi Jinping meeting with him at the ASEAN summit in the Bay Area of California, San Francisco, just a few weeks later, is clearly a sign that he is trying to burnish his foreign policy credentials in order to sort of keep his name in contention. He also conducted a debate with Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida, Ron DeSantis, who is publicly running for president, Governor Newsom, who is, I contend, privately running for president. And then we see the two of them on the same stage arguing essentially about who's doing a better job in the country. And then Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton is someone who has done a lot of work to try to keep her name in the press. Now, because she is a failed candidate, a two-time failed candidate, by the way, failed candidate, because remember, she ran against Barack Obama in 2008. He defeated her first, and then President Trump defeated her the second time 8 years later in 2016. So she's a two-time failed candidate. Never been president. She's only ever been elected as a senator, a state senator here in the United States. She was later appointed Secretary of State under Barack Obama. That in order for her to basically keep her name in the press, she has become more and more increasingly, I would say, bombastic, clearly making statements that just go beyond the pale, talking about how extreme Trump supporters are, how Trump needs to be stopped. And then she's also, if you look very closely, when she talks about, and again, as a former Secretary of State, someone who was involved in foreign policy, she talks a lot about Ukraine. She talks a lot about Russia, a lot about Israel. And she's always very clear, Newsom is as well, she's always very clear to draw a distinction between herself and the Biden-Harris administration and their policy. You don't really hear them talking up each other or trying to claim credit for them as the Democrats in terms of a party. And the reason that a fellow Democrat would not do that is because even they understand that nobody wants to be associated with the baggage of this administration.
Yeah, it seems to be increasingly clear, and it's sort of interesting now with this three-party race. What does RFK do as he runs? People don't realise as well, he's got to raise a lot of money to get on the ballot in various states. So I guess, is he going to do it? Is he going to get the money to get on the ballot? And what impact does he have on the two? And it depends, I suppose, who the Democrat candidate is. But does he take votes from Trump?
The real question is, I think, at this point, an organizational question. So he needs the money, but then he also has to build out the organization in a 50-state operation to be able to achieve ballot access. This is a very high bar in a presidential race, and independent candidates, it's extremely rare for them to be able to do so. This is typically why you run with the backing of a party, even if it is a smaller party. We do have smaller parties in the United States. Typically, they don't play a huge role in the presidential election, other than the role of a spoiler. And so you have this situation where, so the two main sort of, I would call them spoiler parties, are the Libertarian Party and the Green Party in the United States. And typically, they serve to essentially pull votes away from the front runners on the respective side. So the Libertarians pull votes away from the Republicans, the Greens pull votes away from the Democrats. And in the 2020 race, the Greens did not field a candidate in all 50 states, but the Libertarians did. So the Libertarian candidate is pulling votes away from the Republican, at the time Trump, then the Greens were not pulling votes away from the Democrats of Joe Biden. Now, if RFK, let's just play devil's advocate though. If RFK is able to put in place, and certainly he has considerable wealth, I would say he's quite famous in his own right. In addition to being a member of one of the most renowned political dynasties in the United States, probably the top one, at least in terms of the modern era, the Kennedy family. If anyone could surpass the Bush dynasty or the Clinton dynasty, it would certainly be the Kennedys. That even though they kind of disown him, if he's able to get on the ballot, I do actually think that he pulls very strongly from Trump and Trump support, because if you look at the Kennedy voter profile, which is something that I think a lot of people haven't noticed. They typically will say, "Oh, Kennedy Democrat, so he'll pull from Joe Biden," but the demographics of a Kennedy voter, and they used to call this the Kennedy coalition. When his father was running, and then his uncle Ted Kennedy attempted to run for president numerous times, even going so far as to primary Jimmy Carter in 1980, a president of his own party, similar to what RFK was attempting to do in this race. That it is that working class, blue collar sort of worker that has always been the backbone of the Kennedy coalition. And you see this from Boston to the Rust Belt, from the Boston area originally, that I do think that he would hurt Trump in some of these key areas. And I'm not saying it would be a huge swath of voters, but again, it could potentially be enough voters in some areas to swing those states to Biden. So it's something that I've constantly been really ringing the alarm bell about. It's something that I do think the campaign should account for when they're running their vote operations, to understand that their universe of potential voters will be overlapping with that of Kennedy.
Yeah, and it doesn't take much. I mean, we saw how slight some of those figures were in the swing states. It's sort of tens of thousands, really. In some cases, less. I think.
You're right. We're talking about tens of thousands. We're talking in the last race about 40,000 votes.
Yeah.
So if 40,000 votes across 3 states, and really I should say ballots, because the 2020 race in the United States, to say the least, was not conducted up to the normal standards.
Yeah.
So 42,000 ballots were switched or not counted because of the unconstitutional means in which they had been allocated. Then Donald Trump would have been in the White House for the past 4 years.
And of course, that's also not taking into account the very real and clear. I mean, it's beyond doubt now that the intelligence services were involved with the Twitter story. I mean, you were quite involved with that. I think Human Events was one of the key players in exposing it.
So that's exactly right, and that's so the Hunter Biden's case. And at the time, I was sort of a co-host on War Room with Steve Bannon, and Steve is able to get a copy in basically September of 2020. Gets this copy of Hunter Biden's hard drive. Late in the game, we find out we have this thing. We start to go through it, realize the provenance of the information. We also realize the impact that the information that is on this will have. I used to say, typically you get denials from your targets, and you get people who try to, hide things, and you might get a few clues along the way and a few intelligence. We call it INW, indicators and warnings of which way things are going. You don't usually get the whole enchilada just landing in your lap like this, but here we are. And so Bannon and the War Room, of course, then get the hard drive to the New York Post. Then, and we found this out later, that the New York Post story had been flagged essentially by the FBI in the United States, as well as elements of the Department of Homeland Security, both of which are national law enforcement agencies within the national security state of the United States government. And they have both flagged this with the top social media firms, YouTube, Facebook, and then, yes, of course, Twitter. And so they began systematically, and Mark Zuckerberg even said this on Joe Rogan, systematically banning anyone who posted this, or I think in Zuckerberg's case, he said that he limited the reach of the post. So he artificially went in and used his ability as the owner of the platform to limit this. And so we then find later on that 10% of Biden's voters had said definitively that they would have switched their votes, or at least not voted for Biden, had they known about this story. That story was then suppressed, of course, by big tech in conjunction with the intelligence agencies. And so because I viewed that as really one of the greatest and most direct threats from an information standpoint in the 2020 election, when I had the opportunity to speak with Elon Musk, and I find myself in this, we were mentioning before about this this X space, and essentially this conference call that we were all having publicly, though, in this town hall, I took the opportunity to ask him that very question. I said, Elon, if given the chance, if the FBI comes to you and they say that they have concerns about a legal content, right? I would say the way to put this is legal content. Certainly, there is content that needs to be taken down from social media. Child exploitation, death threats, personal information, criminal activity, stuff that is illegal, right? Stuff that is illegal would be taken down. But I said, what would you do if they came to you with legal content and asked you to take it down? His first answer to me was that he would go to the courts. And so he would attempt to fight it in court and say, I'd like to put this before a judge, I'd like to put this before a jury, and follow the legal process for fighting that action by government. And make them, by the way, also have to prove in court why this information was so contemptible that it must be taken down if it wasn't a clear violation of some law or something. And then, I said, okay. And then I pressed him further, asking him, well, you say you want to be transparent, you say you want to act within the law, but what happens if that law enforcement has become so irreparably biased that you're not able to get a favorable decision? Then what? What do you do? And he responded to me that he would be willing to personally go to prison in that situation rather than take down legal content in the context of an election. I said, well, not going to get a deeper answer than that out of the man, and so I guess at that point I'll be seeing him in the gulags, long after not long after the regime has retaken power. But I would say I hope that he lives up to that. I certainly hope
it's a pretty amazing space at the moment. The fact you can do that sort of thing and get that information out there, and you talk about 5G warfare, and I think the fourth turning, which is and the intersection of those, I think in world politics at the moment. What does that all mean, like for the Australian audience? I mean, what is 5G warfare simplified?
Well, so fifth generation warfare, and to understand generational warfare theory, this comes out of military theory. So, first, second, third generation warfare, I think people know that refers to conventional warfare. That's your battlefields, that's your Napoleonic wars, the two armies marching at each other. That's conventional warfare. I think we all kind of know what that looks like. Fourth generation warfare is when you include essentially an element of information warfare on top of that, whereby in the information warfare element to the kinetic and conventional warfare becomes potentially just as powerful. And you certainly see this, by the way, on the ground in Ukraine and Russia, the constant arguments back and forth over body counts, the arguments over some atrocity will be committed or some tragedy, and then the blame will be placed on either side, and videos will go viral with one side blaming another. Civilians are unfortunately killed in the heat of battle, but a video will go out and then go viral, and then the blame will be used to put paint on the other one to increase operations against them. These are information operations. Fifth generation warfare is when you have actual organizations that take that real world capability and then activate that in a cyberspace. An example of this could be, some of the George Floyd riots that we saw throughout the United States, BLM, Antifa being activated at key points within the presidential race of 2020, going after key cities, really putting the United States through what I call a soft color revolution in order to basically overthrow the president of the United States at the time, Donald Trump. And so with 5GW operations, people need to understand that the distinction between the battlefield, the information battlefield, and real life is seamless. And so that battle takes place on little pieces of glass that we hold in our hands every day.
Yeah. It's a completely different and unique environment, I think, and this power of social media is something you touched on this morning on your podcast as well, when you you and your guest, I think his name was Wax, I just forget his first name, George, was it? Who was the...
Gavin. So Gavin was
yeah, it was a really
the
interesting
host
conversation
of that gala in New York.
That's right, yeah. So it was a really interesting conversation, and I think it was you that made the point that social media has now, particularly in a political space, it's now been very effective in showing up the political establishment, in a sense, those that have pre-prepared scripts, that turn up, that kiss a dog, that kiss a baby.
Yes.
And that's some of the power of President Trump's appeal, was that, you know, he's quite authentic. He's been doing the same thing, as you say, since the 80s. And people can see that through social media because he can have that reach where you never did before. So it sort of cuts both ways as long as it can be even-handed. But it's a fascinating concept. It seems to me that all over the West, though, now there are those that seek to shut down platforms like yours and others. In Australia, we've got legislation before our parliament, which will come up next year, which is the Combating Misinformation and Disinformation Bill, which, you know, and it's sort of really almost honed in on those social media platforms.
I already know what that is.
Yeah, and it's coming.
This must be fought, examples. Whether it's Australia, whether it's the EU. Anytime you see or the United States. Anytime you see language like this, it must be fought and it must be opposed by everyone across the political spectrum, because what that is constantly an ability to give. And so in the United States, we had something that was called the Disinformation Governance Board. Was created under the auspices of the Department of Homeland Security, which is a law enforcement agency. I found out about this thing when it was still kind of in its infancy. There was a political actor, operative by the name of Nina Yankovic. She was about to be put in charge of this thing, empowered by the Department of Homeland Security, Secretary Mayorkas, who's there right now. By the way, this is the department for folks who outside the country, outside the U.S. This is the department in the U.S. that's supposed to be maintaining our borders and our ports and protecting us from terrorism. And it was set up in the wake of 9/11. It has nothing to do with misinformation or disinformation. And yet all of a sudden they've determined, like I said before, right at the outset, all this is connected, that leftists view words as violence. And they will view words as terrorism. They'll say, well, this is an incitement to terrorism because you have shared information that we believe is inflammatory, or we believe is incorrect. And by the way, the one that I really like next is malinformation. Have you heard this one yet? Malinformation. So malinformation, this is even better. This is even beyond misinformation, disinformation. That's because those can be fact checked. Malinformation is information that may be true information that yet may inflame or incite passions, which those passions could then potentially, by some nebulous, vague, unknown actor, lead to violence. And so they'll say malinformation could be information that's true, but because we've determined that it might upset somebody, it should be censored. They are now rolling this out.
It's staggering.
And so Nina Yankovic, and by the way, the Washington Post, just to close the loop on that, the Washington Post credited my work exposing Nina Yankovic with getting her fired summarily by the Department of Homeland Security, and the Disinformation Governance Board being completely rolled up and destroyed, just completely and utterly destroyed.
I mean, this pattern clearly is being followed across the West, because our Department of Homeland Security, probably the most similar department, is our Department of Home Affairs here in Australia. And on the back of it, just goes to show how important...
Yeah, in the UK, the Home Office.
Yeah, it goes to show how important the work that people like yourself have done is, because on the back of that Twitter file scandal, I asked for some freedom of information documents in relation to our Home Affairs Department to see if they were doing similar things in Australia. And lo and behold, we found out a few months back that the Department of Home Affairs in Australia were using foreign companies to monitor Australians' social media posts, then taking that information, sending it to Facebook, Twitter and the others, and saying, hey, this might have breached your policies, what do you reckon? And then setting the dogs on them that way and allowing the social media companies. This is all during COVID. They were pulling down thousands of posts. And it's the same.
And what they're trying to do next, is because they got a taste of unlimited power during COVID. And what they put Australia through during COVID with that power, and I will never forget what they did, setting up those internment areas, going after a couple of kids who wanted to hang out on the beach in the summertime and sending, these hit squads after them, sending SWAT teams after them. Meanwhile, I'm sure, the criminals and the vandals and rapists and murderers, are going free because everyone's trying to run after the kids on the beach who are, clearly at no threat, or a guy who's out surfing by himself, who's clearly a no threat to anyone because he's by himself and he's outside where he cannot give the virus to anybody. The fact that they got this taste of unlimited raw power is something that they do not want to give up. And so that is why you're seeing, and we will see now, I talk about the election, I'm very focused on it, but something that I see on the horizon, we have the Davos meeting of the World Economic Forum is coming up very rapidly. It's actually the same week as the Iowa caucuses in the United States. Starts January 15th in Davos, Switzerland, where, last year I was detained by the World Economic Forum police for doing my job and reporting from the street, just standing in front of a camera, just like a reporter, like I always do. And then I get arrested and held at gunpoint by these apparatchiks. And because we were exposing what they were up to, I will tell you, they were going to use the auspices of climate change next in terms of this. And Hillary Clinton has been out talking already about the deaths attributable to climate change. And I believe that one of the things that they will start to work on next is getting climate change enshrined as a potential or official listing as a cause of death. And so if climate change can be listed as a cause of death, for seniors who, they'll try to say, well, there was a heat wave and the heat wave was perpetuated by global warming. And so the seniors who were killed, this was due to climate change, right? And so and then they'll create, and then as you say, they create the crisis. This is very Hegelian, by the way. So they create the crisis. Then there's our response to the crisis. And then the synthesis is that we create a government entity, a government body, a law enforcement body in order to deal with the crisis. And this will be the next iteration. And again, it's the same, using the same policies that they got away with under COVID. They're looking for the next big thing. And currently what they are focused on is of course climate change. But if they're right down the road from Davos is the World Economic Forum in Geneva, Switzerland, or excuse me, the World Health Organization in Geneva, Switzerland, and they would be more than happy to put those COVID policies into full effect using the Global Pandemic Treaty, which is something that is currently in draft in Geneva as we speak.
Yeah, look, it's all, we are leading parallel lives. Just last week, South Australian Department of Health, SA Health, issued their annual report listing an entire chapter listing climate change as an existential threat to humanity. So,
there you go.
This message has permeated all out through the West. And
wow, how could I have guessed that without
how
even?
could you have guessed?
I've actually never even been to Australia, so I've never even read the report. But there you go.
Jack, look, there's so much more to cover, but I'm conscious of your time, and you've been so gracious in giving us an incredible insight. It's been so interesting. I really, really enjoyed it. I want people to know where they can get hold of you, though, and Human Events. Tell people how to listen, because as I said, I listen every single morning. That 80s intro music as well, it's part of my daily routine. So.
I love it. We're bringing it all back. Because we are the side of the future. We are the side that actually stands for human expansion, human advancement. When Elon Musk says he wants to colonize the stars, I say, let's go. Let's go. Sign me up. This was the dream of the 1980s, that we were moving towards the future, that we had the space shuttle program, that we were going to start with the moon, and then we were going to move on to Mars, the asteroid belt. All of these things are possible. Oh, and I want to explain that to everybody, that all of these things are possible, and you have to explain what the vision is, and that's what we try to do with our music choices. That's what we try to do with our topic choices, because we talk about so many terrible things that are going on now. But I do also think, and this is something we talked about with Elon, that we need to define what our vision for the future of humanity is. And sure, we can get mired in the conflicts of the past and the ethnic and the gender conflicts and the geopolitical conflicts. And sure, guess what? We've got plenty of them. We've got plenty of those. Or we could present people with a vision of the future. The left does this, by the way. The left does present a vision of the future. It's horrific, but they present one to their side. You don't see the right do this very well. So that's something at Human Events, humanevents.com. We have the website up. The podcast is there as well. People can go and download it. You can check it out, listen to 2x speed like I do. You can do it twice as fast. And we really try to push forward that idea of a positive futurism, because that is what we are standing for. And for the people that are in our way of achieving it, well, we are going to have to get them out of our way.
Jack, absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. People should go and listen to Human Events. It's a great way to start the day. Thanks for your time. And look, stay in touch. Here in Australia, you've got a lot of fans. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for coming on.
All right. God bless. And I will have to make it my resolution to get to Australia and meet them at some point.
You have to.
I will do it.
We'll show you around. There's a lot of good places here, and you'll love it.
All right. Let's do it.
All right. Thanks, Poso. Good man.